Hello and welcome back to another short bite-sized video from the Activism, Influence and Change programme at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Today we're going to be looking at social and moral norms. We'll begin by exploring why many of the wicked problems that emerge from the complex systems activists want to change are underpinned by social and moral norms. We're then going to look at how activists can support those norms to change as part of their wider influencing or change strategies. We begin by returning to the iceberg metaphor that we introduced in an earlier video on systems thinking. In that video, we argued that many of the wicked problems that emerge from complex systems that activists want to work on or address can be quite easily be grasped when they take the form of institutions that are having poor outcomes or that we might want to reform, or behaviours or practices that we want to abolish or modify, or even measurable development indicators that we might want to improve. We can see them and grasp them and point to them as problems. However, what's more difficult for many activists is to point to and grasp the social and moral norms that are often intimately connected to the problems that they want to address. In fact, social and moral norms and the shape they take and where they stem from are often fiercely debated by activists and members of wider society, and with huge disagreement about which ones are more or less important to particular societal issues or problems. Just as a reminder, we argue that social norms are the behaviours or the beliefs that people hold because they expect or they believe that others expect them to hold them or adhere to them. And if they don't do that, they'll be somehow socially sanctioned. Moral norms are often harder for activists to work upon because they're beliefs and behaviours that people have regardless of what they think other people think of them. Normally they're the norms that people pick up or subscribe to early in their life, maybe in childhood or due to some kind of religious education or some other value system that they've picked up. When we're confronted by wicked problems that we believe have their roots or intimately connected to social and moral norms, it can often be good to start with thinking about where individuals and societal groups and wider society, where do those norms stem from? How do people pick them up and come to adhere to them? One way to do this is to begin by thinking about individuals and think about how they get ideas, particular beliefs and skill sets and attitudes, often at a family level or within the household when they're young. We can then work our way out into the wider system to think further about how they pick up certain social and moral norms. We can look at their family, we can look at their social networks and their friendship groups and how they may reinforce particular social and moral norms or work to change them. We then can think about the organisations and wider community kind of cultural and economic and political institutions that people might be coming into contact with and whether they are reinforcing or working against particular social and moral norms. Lastly, we could probably think about the state and whether through its policies, its laws, its incentive systems, it's reinforcing particular social and moral norms. One example of this might be around healthy eating, with people learning their attitudes and their beliefs around the rightness or wrongness of healthy eating and what constitutes healthy or unhealthy eating. You might learn that from the family. It might be connected to your beliefs or philosophical systems. That might change as you get older and you start interacting with different types of social networks and friendship groups. Maybe perhaps some people are into sport, others shun healthy eating as the sign of being too disciplined, who knows. Again, you might come into contact with organisations, healthcare organisations, people who run wellness retreats, companies who have an economic interest in social eating, all of which will shape your social and moral norms around healthy eating. And then lastly, the state and its policies, its small nudges, its incentive systems, its laws, they're also going to shape your attitudes and social norms around healthy eating. One way to begin to think about this is the sentence in the last bullet point there, that people often adhere to particular norms due to the preferences they have, the options they have to choose from, and the beliefs they have about those particular options. In the next slide, we're going to explore how this can begin activists to think about how they might support change. If we hold that people adhere to particular social and moral norms due to their preferences, their options that they have available to them, and their beliefs about those options, we can begin to think about how we might change them. Sometimes change might be about providing people with newer information or alternatives that help them to change their preferences. The new information can include skills to allow them to make better choices, or resources in order to do their own work and realize that they have more options available to them. Evidence can be particularly useful here, as well as stories to show how change away from particular harmful social or moral norms can be beneficial and the social sanctions can be avoided. This is kind of a delicate process that's going to be different with each context and the particular social and norms that activists want to change, but it gives us a rough idea about how that change might begin to happen. To illustrate how social norms can begin to change and be changed, we have 3 examples on this slide. The first one concerns the Me Too movement, which was a female-led movement focused on abuse of power in the workplace, particularly men abusing women for sexual gratification. One of the tactics, or one of the things that Me Too did very well in order to change entrenched taboos about speaking out about abuse, was to provide online spaces where women could discuss their experiences. These spaces were safe because they were usually anonymous, but they allowed people to find community. They changed the idea that abuse was a small and marginal thing that only happened to certain people or a certain sort of people, and they showed that people could speak out without huge social sanction. That ability had knock-on effects offline as well, with people speaking out and accusing particular perpetrators, and with women in future thinking or believing that they could break those older taboos and report abuse when it happened to them. Our second example comes from the World Health Organization, who have long been interested in working on the practice of female genital mutilation, or FGM. In the 90s, they were having very little impact, talking to communities and power holders in multiple countries about the practice. However, they quickly found that when they framed the practice as a health issue and as being detrimental to the health of women, they had a lot more impact and people were much more willing to discuss it, and in fact they managed to persuade 14 countries to outlaw the practice. So there you're seeing a reframing of the issue and people's beliefs around its benefits or its impacts in order to push a social norm change. Our last example comes from Pakistan, from a development program that was concerned with birth spacing. In short, it wanted to change the social norm that many women were having as many children as quickly as they could and are not allowing space between births in order for their bodies to recover. To work on this, the program engaged and reached out to religious leaders who it talked with and discussed how they could use Quranic verses to help persuade members of their congregation for the need for birth spacing, particularly at Friday prayers where both men and women could hear the messages around the benefits of birth spacing. And by doing that publicly, it worked against the idea that it was a social norm expected of everyone.